Okay, welcome to the ninth lecture in the 2011-2012 English Lecture Series. Today's speaker is Mr. Mark Austin. He's a visiting professor at Indian Institute of Media,
Journalism and New Media.
And Journalism and New Media in Bangalore, India. And he will be giving us a presentation today called The Multimedia Revolution, The World of News Will Never Be the Same Again. I met Mr. Austin a couple of years ago while he was working for Daily Yomiuri Shimbun in Tokyo. He was there for 13 years as a journalist. He's written for a number of large publications around the world, and it's a great pleasure to have him here today. So let me turn it over to Mr. Austin.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here at Otaru University of Commerce. I'd like to thank Professor Clanky for inviting me and Ms. Takada for her kind assistance with the arrangements for this talk. So the lecture I'll give today was originally written in various forms for undergraduate students at universities and technical colleges in Bangalore, with a view to encouraging them to consider doing a postgraduate diploma in journalism at the Indian Institute of Journalism and New Media, where I teach the multimedia, magazine writing and editing, and opinion and editorial writing courses. I considered completely rewriting the beginning of the most recent version of the lecture, which I gave at Engineering College, because I thought it might not be relevant to the experience of Shodai students. But after taking a look at Shodai's website, I saw that it has a Department of Information Management and Science. So I decided at the beginning of the lecture, which introduces science communication in the context of mainstream media organizations reporting of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, would require less revision than I had feared. Professor Kanchan Kaur, who's the Vice Dean at IIJNM, mentioned to me at the beginning of April, when she accompanied me in our tour of the Bangalore universities and colleges where I give this lecture, that engineering and science graduates always seem to be among the high flyers at IIJNM. Now that certainly was the case last academic year, in my experience. I asked two of my students who have applied science degrees, Mollishri Srivastava and Pradija Sankarapandian, to share their opinions on why journalism is a good fit for engineering and science graduates. And here's what Mollishri, a graduate of Chandigarh Engineering College in Mohali, Punjab, said. Engineering courses sharpen students' minds over 4 years. We have to stretch our minds to understand various complex theories in a limited time. This has particularly helped me with research for my stories. While going through government reports, I can get to the main point quickly because I'm used to doing so. I did a BTech in information technology. One thing about that stream is that you can go into any field after pursuing it, as IT is now an integral part of almost every industry. So if you have your basics in place, it's easy to adapt to the new world of digital journalism. People with an IT background can excel in this field. Pradija, who studied at Birla Institute of Technology and Science in Palani, Rajasthan, identified 3 key advantages that a science background has for those entering journalism. The first, she said, is that engineering adopts an analytical approach toward problems. This helps me understand situations better when I go out reporting. The second is that engineering candidates' reasoning ability is better in general because of the series of quantitative aptitude and logical reasoning-based exams they write repeatedly for 4 years. This makes them question everything they encounter with curiosity. The third advantage is that an engineer makes a life-changing decision by choosing journalism, except in a few cases such as when an automobile engineer gets into automobile journalism. So he or she is definitely interested in contributing to social change. So there are 2 views on the edge that an engineering or science background might give a student over other trainee journalists. Incidentally, I'm sure that the academic rigor Shodai students studying economics, law, and commerce learn to apply when approaching a problem would serve them equally well were they to later enter the field of journalism. But what about the role that professional journalists with a science background play in our increasingly technology-dependent world? It occurred to me reading that many contradictory reports about the implication of the disaster at the nuclear plant in Fukushima Prefecture, that there is an increasing need for journalists with a science background. In a nod to the word literati, let's call them technorati, who can interpret complicated technology-related stories for the man and woman in the street. In December, IIJNM hosted a talk by one such journalist, Professor Brian Trench, who recently retired from the School of Communications at Dublin City University. Professor Trench spoke on the ways in which new media developments have reshaped science communication, which refers to media talking about science with non-scientists, the man and woman in the street, in other words. I asked Professor Trench in April what lessons could be learned from media coverage of the March 11th earthquake and tsunami and the ensuing nuclear disaster. This is what he had to say. We have a very recent and very strong example of how journalists in general can be called on to handle complex, technical and uncertain information in reporting major events. The earthquake and tsunami in Japan, and more particularly the continuing crisis at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, have highlighted the need for journalists to have high numeracy skills and the need for major mass media to have in-house at least some journalists who have particular competence in handling specialized knowledge. When reports state that radioactivity in the nuclear plant or levels of radioactive iodine in the sea near the plant are hundreds or thousands of times higher than the usual levels, what does this mean? Reporting the risk to plant workers may seem straightforward enough, but reporting the risk to those living nearby or as far away as Tokyo involves complex issues of dose levels, duration of exposure, the half-life of radioactive isotopes, and much more. These matters are also contested among established experts, so journalists are called on to make sensitive assessments of conflicting claims. Multimedia journalism is particularly suited to covering issues like this. Using hyperlinks, journalists can point readers to various sources of information and argument, always ensuring that the sources are appropriately identified and described. For this, they need to be able to distinguish different kinds of institutions, organizations, and publications in the research and regulatory fields. Journalists can use combinations of text, audio, video, and infographic material to make the information and claims more accessible, but also to put them in appropriate context. The challenge is less one of transmitting information, much of which is already available directly from institutional sources, and more one making sense of information. Okay, I hope you'll forgive me for going slightly off topic by starting my talk on the subject of science communication, but I thought that the issue of the reporting of the Fukushima nuclear crisis would naturally interest those of you who might be considering a career in journalism. In today's talk, I'd like to answer the questions, what is multimedia, and how has multimedia revolutionized news production? Well, the word multimedia is about the same age as I am, with its first recorded appearance dating back to the mid-1960s. Back then, it was most commonly used in the context of performance art and music, with slide or light shows cued to an audio track. By the early 1990s, it had acquired its current meaning, defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as using, involving, or encompassing several media. But in terms of grammar, the word multimedia seems somewhat problematic, as media is the plural form of medium, and the prefix multi itself denotes plurality. It seems therefore tautological, which I believe is dogigo hanpuku no in Japanese. The thing to bear in mind, however, that it is commonly understood nowadays to refer to multiple discrete forms of media and the content delivered through those media. In other words, a newspaper is a medium, but a pile of newspapers is not multimedia. Television is a medium, but the TVs you see in the window of a big camera are not multimedia. Radio is a medium, but flicking through the channels of a radio is not a multimedia experience. So how do we define multimedia? Can any of you give me a definition?
It's like you use a video and
Yeah?
the written text,
Yes?
websites,
Anything else? That's three things.
or I don't know, like also audio samples, like because it's just like a video without
Right.
video.
Yeah, you've got the right idea. A comprehensive definition might be any combination of two or more items of text, graphics, audio, still and video photography, and animation delivered by computer or other electronic means in an integrated manner. I mentioned that the word multimedia is like me in its 40s. I think there's a very good chance that I might outlive the word, because nowadays all media are moving toward a multifunctional mode, connoted by the word multimedia, which may well sound quaint 5 years from now. If you think of the term motor car, for example, that fell into disuse long ago because, after all cars have motors. I wouldn't be surprised if cell phone and mobile phone are, in the not too distant future, shortened to simple phone, given that cell phone ownership exceeds landline phone ownership in Japan and the United States. Similarly, technological developments, notably the creation of the internet, have heavily influenced the media formats through which news has been delivered as long as I've been around. Newspapers, radio and TV, and a phenomenon called convergence is taking place that makes the multimedia seem somehow redundant. I'll talk more about that later. I'd like to focus on the effect that the internet has had on newspapers, because in the West they have been hardest hit by this technology. It's a very different story in India and China. Until about 2004, I was bullish about the prospects for the survival of newspapers in print format. My reasoning was that the newspaper was a so-called mature technology. There was little, if any, room for it to be improved. It's cheap, it contains a lot of information that's mostly no more than 12 hours old, it's easily portable, widely available, easily disposable, and recyclable. The analogy I used to use was that of another mature technology, the sock. Now, how could a sock be improved unless the shape of the human foot were somehow to change, I argued. But what didn't occur to me, to extend the metaphor, is that the environment or climate might change and people might stop wearing socks and shoes altogether and put on sandals. In this analogy, environment or climate change stands for the emergence of hyperconnectivity, and sandals are cell phones. By hyperconnectivity, I mean the rapid development of multiple routes of people-to-people and people-to-machine communication, including phone, video phone, email, instant messaging, and so-called Web 2.0 information services such as social networking sites, blogs, wikis, and video sharing sites.